I was a cashier accused of theft, and the words hit me like a physical blow as Mr. Davidson's finger jabbed toward the missing cash drawer total on his computer screen. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his angular face as he leaned back in his office chair, arms crossed, waiting for my explanation that wouldn't come, because there wasn't one to give. The numbers didn't lie, he insisted with that thin smile I'd grown to hate over the past 6 months. Register 3 was short $47.83 at the end of my Friday shift. Security footage showed only me handling that register during the final 2 hours before closing. The math was simple, Davidson explained, his voice carrying that patronizing edge he reserved for employees he considered beneath him. I stood there in his cramped office, surrounded by motivational posters about teamwork and integrity, feeling the walls close in as he laid out the case against me. My hands remained steady at my sides, but inside something cold and sharp was taking root. 6 months of perfect attendance, never a single discrepancy in my drawer, customer commendations posted on the break room wall with my name on them. None of it mattered now. Davidson's eyes never left mine as he slid the termination paperwork across his desk. The pen he offered gleamed under the overhead light, and I noticed how his manicured fingers drummed against the desk surface in a rhythm that suggested he was enjoying this moment far more than any decent person should. The satisfaction radiating from him was almost palpable, like heat from a furnace. I signed my name with deliberate precision, each letter formed with the kind of care that comes from suppressed rage. Davidson collected the papers with unnecessary flourish, already reaching for his phone to call security. My badge and store keys clinked softly as I placed them on his desk, the sound echoing in the small space like a funeral bell. The walk through the store felt endless. Every co-worker I passed averted their eyes, some with genuine sympathy, others with the guilty relief of those grateful the axe hadn't fallen on them. Janet from customer service touched my arm briefly as I passed, her expression saying everything her voice couldn't in front of the security guard trailing 3 steps behind me. Outside in the parking lot, I sat in my Honda Civic for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The rage wasn't the hot, explosive kind that burns bright and fast. This was different. This was ice forming in my veins, crystallizing into something harder and more dangerous than mere anger. This was the birth of purpose. That first weekend, I replayed every interaction with Davidson, every conversation, every moment when his behavior had struck me as odd. The way he always volunteered for inventory counts, how he insisted on handling the cash office procedures alone, claiming it was for security purposes. The expensive watch that had appeared on his wrist 3 months ago, far beyond what a grocery store manager's salary could afford. Monday morning, I drove past the store at opening time, then again during the lunch rush, and once more near closing. I wasn't stalking or planning anything dramatic. I was simply observing, letting my eyes adjust to seeing the place from the outside, as a predator rather than prey. The patterns began to emerge almost immediately. Davidson's Mercedes sedan, the one he claimed belonged to his girlfriend, was always parked in the same spot. He arrived 15 minutes before his shift and left 20 minutes after, carrying a black leather portfolio that I'd never noticed when I worked there. Small details, but details nonetheless. The local library became my second home. I researched employment law, wrongful termination, and the specific policies for retail theft accusations. Most importantly, I learned about surveillance systems and how retail establishments were required to maintain security footage. The knowledge settled into my mind like ammunition into a chamber. 3 weeks after my termination, I applied for a job at the coffee shop across the street from the grocery store. The irony wasn't lost on me that my new position offered a perfect vantage point of my former workplace. During slow afternoon shifts, I could observe the loading dock, the employee entrance, and most crucially, Davidson's daily routines. The coffee shop manager, Mrs. Chen, was everything Davidson wasn't. Fair, honest, and genuinely concerned about her employees' well-being. She asked about my previous job with careful diplomacy, and I offered a sanitized version that painted my departure as a mutual decision. The truth would have to wait. From my new position behind the espresso machine, I watched Davidson's patterns solidify into predictable routines. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, he would emerge from the employee entrance carrying his portfolio, walk to his car, then return 10 minutes later empty-handed. The loading dock was busy during those times, trucks arriving and departing, creating natural cover for whatever he was doing. My first real break came when Sarah Martinez walked into the coffee shop on a Thursday evening. Sarah had worked in the store's cash office when I was there, handling deposits and financial reconciliation. Her order was simple, but her demeanor was anything but. She looked exhausted, stressed, and kept glancing toward the grocery store with an expression I recognized well. As she waited for her latte, Sarah's phone buzzed continuously. Each notification made her shoulders tense further, and when she answered one call, I could hear Davidson's voice on the other end, even from behind the counter. The conversation was brief and one-sided, with Sarah mostly nodding and offering short responses that sounded increasingly strained. After she hung up, I approached with her drink in a carefully casual expression. Sarah recognized me immediately, her eyes widening with surprise and something that might have been sympathy. We exchanged pleasantries about my new job, but beneath the surface, I sensed an opportunity developing. Sarah glanced around the coffee shop nervously before mentioning that the cash office had been experiencing irregularities since I left. Nothing dramatic, she was quick to add. Just small discrepancies that Davidson insisted were accounting errors or employee mistakes. The way she said it suggested she had her own doubts about those explanations. I listened with the appropriate level of interest, neither too eager nor too dismissive. Sarah seemed to need someone to voice her concerns to, and I was more than willing to be that person. The coffee shop's atmosphere felt safe to her, separate from the store's politics and Davidson's oversight. Over the following weeks, Sarah became a regular customer, always ordering during the late afternoon shift when the coffee shop was quietest. Our conversations gradually revealed a pattern of financial irregularities that dated back months, all coinciding with Davidson's increased involvement in cash office procedures. Sarah mentioned how Davidson had recently implemented new policies requiring him to personally verify all deposit preparations. She described his insistence on handling bank runs alone, claiming it reduced liability. Most telling, she revealed his habit of staying late on certain weekdays to review security footage, ostensibly looking for employee theft patterns. The pieces were assembling themselves into a picture I didn't like, but wasn't surprised by. Davidson wasn't just a petty tyrant drunk on authority. He was systematically stealing from his own store and using his position to cover his tracks. The accusation against me hadn't been based on evidence of my guilt, but on his need for a scapegoat to explain the ongoing discrepancies. I started documenting everything Sarah told me, not in an obvious notebook, but in my phone's voice memo app during my walk home each evening. The information needed to be preserved exactly as she'd shared it, with all the emotional context and specific details that would be crucial later. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday in October. Sarah arrived for her usual late afternoon coffee, looking more upset than I'd ever seen her. She ordered her latte with shaking hands and sat in the corner booth, facing away from the grocery store. When I brought her drink over, she was staring at her phone with an expression of pure distress. Davidson had called an emergency cash office audit for the following morning, Sarah explained. The discrepancies had grown too large to ignore, and district management was sending investigators. She was terrified of being blamed for the missing money, especially given her role in the financial procedures. I sat across from her and listened as she described the mounting pressure Davidson had been applying, his increasingly aggressive questioning about her procedures, and his subtle suggestions that she might be making errors that explained the shortfalls. The gaslighting was textbook, designed to make her doubt herself while positioning him as the diligent manager trying to solve a problem. That evening, I stayed late at the coffee shop after closing, ostensibly to clean the espresso machine, but actually to observe the grocery store's evening routines. The loading dock was active until 7:30, with the last delivery truck departing just as the store's interior lights began dimming for closing procedures. Davidson's Mercedes remained in the parking lot long after the last customer left. At 8:15, I watched him emerge from the employee entrance carrying his portfolio. But instead of heading to his car, he walked to the dumpster area behind the loading dock, an area not visible from the store's main security cameras. I moved to the coffee shop's back window, which offered a narrow view of the dumpster area. Davidson stood there for several minutes, apparently waiting for something. At 8:25, a white van pulled into the alley behind the store. The driver remained inside while Davidson approached the passenger window. The exchange was brief and professional. Davidson handed over his portfolio, received what appeared to be an envelope in return, then walked back toward the employee entrance. The van departed immediately, leaving no trace of the meeting except for Davidson's satisfied expression as he passed under the parking lot lights. I now understood the mechanism of his theft. Davidson wasn't simply skimming cash from registers or manipulating deposit totals. He was selling information, possibly customer data or corporate financial records, using his access to the store's systems and his position as manager to facilitate the transactions. The portfolio made perfect sense now. It was the perfect vehicle for transporting documents or data storage devices without appearing suspicious. His routine of leaving the store and returning empty-handed was him meeting buyers, probably different ones on different days. Each transaction carefully timed to avoid detection. This revelation changed everything. Davidson wasn't just stealing money. He was potentially compromising customer information and corporate security. The scope of his crimes extended far beyond simple theft, and the evidence I needed would require more sophisticated methods to obtain. I spent the weekend researching data theft, corporate espionage, and the legal ramifications of selling confidential business information. The penalties were severe, particularly for someone in Davidson's position of trust. If I could prove what he was doing, the consequences would be career-ending and potentially criminal. Monday morning brought news that made my blood run cold. Sarah called in sick to work, then showed up at the coffee shop looking like she hadn't slept in days. The audit had gone exactly as she'd feared. The missing money totaled nearly $3,000 over the past 2 months, and Davidson had positioned her as the primary suspect. Sarah's access to the cash office had been suspended pending a full investigation. Davidson had presented a compelling case to the district managers, complete with documentation showing how her procedural changes coincided with the theft patterns. The evidence was circumstantial but damning, and Sarah was facing the same fate that had befallen me. I listened to her story with growing fury that I kept carefully hidden beneath a mask of sympathy and concern. Davidson was using the same playbook, finding vulnerable employees to blame for his own crimes while positioning himself as the vigilant manager trying to protect company assets. But this time, I was watching from the outside. This time, I had advanced knowledge of his methods and motivations. This time, I could do something about it. That afternoon, I made my first move. Using a prepaid cell phone purchased with cash, I called the store's corporate whistleblower hotline. I didn't identify myself, but provided specific details about Davidson's unusual behavior patterns, his insistence on handling financial procedures alone, and his suspicious after-hours activities. The call was designed to create scrutiny, not to trigger immediate action. Corporate investigations moved slowly and methodically, which would give me time to gather the evidence I needed while putting pressure on Davidson from above. The next phase required infiltration. I needed access to the store's security system and Davidson's private office activities. The coffee shop position provided excellent surveillance opportunities, but I needed to get closer to gather actionable evidence. I started by befriending Marcus, the night security guard who worked Thursday through Sunday shifts. Marcus was young, underpaid, and generally dissatisfied with his job. He frequented the coffee shop during his dinner breaks, usually complaining about the store's management and their unreasonable expectations. Building rapport with Marcus took patience and careful psychology. I positioned myself as someone who understood the frustrations of working for difficult bosses, sharing sanitized stories about my own experiences with workplace politics. Marcus responded to the empathy, gradually opening up about his specific grievances with Davidson. Marcus revealed that Davidson often stayed late on weekdays, claiming to review security footage for employee misconduct. But Marcus had noticed that Davidson spent most of these sessions in his office with the door closed, only occasionally checking the actual surveillance monitors. More importantly, Marcus mentioned that Davidson had recently requested copies of specific security footage segments, always from the cash office area during certain time periods. The requests were framed as part of the theft investigation, but Marcus found it odd that Davidson wanted the footage burned to personal DVDs rather than kept in the official system. This information confirmed my suspicions about Davidson's evidence manipulation. He was selectively editing the security footage to support his narrative while removing evidence of his own crimes. The DVDs were likely being used to create false evidence against employees like Sarah and myself. I needed to see those DVDs and the original footage they came from. That meant gaining access to Davidson's office during one of his late-night sessions, a proposition that carried significant risk but offered the potential for decisive evidence. The opportunity came 3 weeks later. Marcus mentioned that Davidson would be working late Thursday evening to prepare for another district audit. The timing was perfect. The store would be closed, foot traffic around the building would be minimal, and Davidson would be focused on his fraudulent documentation. I spent Tuesday and Wednesday conducting surveillance from the coffee shop, documenting the exact timing of Davidson's routines and the security guard's patrol patterns. Marcus typically spent his evening hours in the break room watching movies on his phone, only conducting building checks once per hour. Thursday evening, I parked my Honda 3 blocks from the store and walked through the residential neighborhood behind the shopping center. The grocery store's rear exit opened onto a service road that was poorly lit and rarely patrolled. At 9:30, with the store officially closed for an hour, I approached the building. The employee entrance required a key card, but I'd observed that the loading dock's emergency exit could be opened from outside if someone held the interior handle. It was a fire code violation that Davidson had never bothered to address, probably because fixing it would require acknowledging the security flaw. I tested the door carefully, applying steady pressure until I felt the mechanism give way. The door opened silently, revealing the darkened loading dock area. The ambient noise from the refrigeration systems masked any sound from my entry, and the dock area was hidden from the main security cameras. Moving through the store in darkness felt surreal. I knew the layout perfectly from my months as an employee, but navigating by memory while avoiding detection required intense concentration. The main corridor led past the cash office, Davidson's office, and the security monitoring station. Light spilled from under Davidson's office door, accompanied by the soft clicking of computer keys. I positioned myself in the darkened cash office, which offered a direct view through Davidson's window. His desk was cluttered with papers, DVDs, and what appeared to be customer account printouts. Davidson worked with focused intensity, occasionally pausing to review documents or check his phone. On his computer screen, I could see surveillance footage playing, but from my angle, the specific content wasn't visible. Every few minutes, he would mark something on a notepad, then return to typing. The portfolio sat open on his desk, revealing manila folders filled with what looked like financial reports and customer data sheets. Davidson would periodically select documents from these folders, scan them with a portable scanner connected to his laptop, then return them to their original positions. I watched this process for 20 minutes, documenting the details with my phone's camera, when Davidson's attention was focused on his computer. The evidence was building, but I needed something more definitive, something that would be impossible for him to explain away or deny. My opportunity came when Davidson stepped away from his desk to use the restroom. The moment his office door closed, I moved quickly to his window. His computer screen showed a paused surveillance video from the cash office, time-stamped during one of my shifts from 3 months ago. But this wasn't the original footage. I could see digital artifacts around the edges of the frame, indicating that the video had been edited. Sections had been spliced together, creating a narrative that didn't match my memory of the actual events. Davidson wasn't just stealing money. He was manufacturing evidence against innocent employees. The portfolio contained even more damning evidence. Customer account information, social security numbers, credit card data, and personal financial details filled the folders. Davidson was selling far more than just company information. He was trafficking in identity theft and financial fraud. I used my phone to photograph as many documents as possible, working quickly but carefully to capture clear images of the most incriminating materials. The scanner on Davidson's desk was still connected to his laptop, which displayed a folder containing hundreds of scanned customer files organized by date and account value. Davidson's footsteps in the hallway forced me to retreat to the cash office. I watched him return to his desk and resume his work, oblivious to my presence just 15 feet away. The remainder of his session involved burning DVDs with edited surveillance footage, creating false evidence that would be used to frame Sarah and possibly other employees. At 11:15, Davidson finally finished his work. He packed the portfolio carefully, secured his computer, and turned off the office lights. I remained hidden in the cash office until I heard the employee entrance close and saw his Mercedes leave the parking lot. The evidence I'd gathered was comprehensive but circumstantial. I had photos of suspicious documents and activity, but I needed something more concrete to ensure that Davidson couldn't escape justice through legal technicalities or corporate politics. I needed the original, unedited surveillance footage that Davidson was trying to destroy. The next morning, I called in sick to the coffee shop and drove to the electronics store downtown. Using cash, I purchased a high-capacity external hard drive in professional data recovery software. If Davidson was editing footage, the original files might still exist on the security system's storage drives. That afternoon, I returned to the coffee shop and sought out Marcus during his dinner break. Our conversation focused on the store's security system and his access to the surveillance archives. Marcus mentioned that the system automatically backed up footage to redundant drives and that accessing older files required administrator privileges that Davidson controlled. But Marcus also revealed a crucial detail. The system's maintenance mode could be accessed using a master password that hadn't been changed since the equipment was installed. The password was taped inside the security panel, a violation of every cybersecurity protocol, but typical of the store's lax approach to technology management. I memorized the password Marcus inadvertently revealed while complaining about the system's complexity. The plan forming in my mind was risky but necessary. I needed to access the security system during a time when I could work undisturbed for at least an hour. Sunday night provided the perfect opportunity. The store was closed, Marcus worked alone, and Davidson never came in on weekends. I arranged to meet Marcus during his dinner break, bringing coffee from the shop as a gesture of friendship. Marcus was grateful for the caffeine and company during his long shift. We sat in the break room discussing his plans to find a better job and his frustrations with the store's management. After 30 minutes, Marcus excused himself to conduct his hourly patrol, leaving me alone with access to the entire building. The security office was adjacent to the break room, and Marcus had left the door propped open for better air circulation. The surveillance system's control panel was exactly where Marcus had described, with the master password still taped inside, just as he'd mentioned. I connected my external drive to the system and navigated to the archived footage from my final week of employment. The original files were massive, containing hours of high-resolution video from multiple cameras. I selected the specific time periods that corresponded to Davidson's edited versions and began the download process. While the files transferred, I accessed the system's administrative logs. Davidson's editing activities were clearly documented, showing exactly when and how he'd manipulated the surveillance footage. The logs also revealed that he'd deleted several complete days of footage from periods when the cash office discrepancies had occurred. But the system's redundant backup drives contained everything. Davidson's technological incompetence had saved the very evidence he'd tried to destroy. The original footage showed not only my innocence, but also captured Davidson's own theft activities in the cash office during times when he thought he was unobserved. The transfer completed just as Marcus returned from his patrol. I disconnected the drive and rejoined him in the break room, maintaining casual conversation while internally celebrating the success of my infiltration. The evidence I now possessed was irrefutable and comprehensive. Monday morning, I called the district office using my real name and requested a meeting with the regional manager. I explained that I had been wrongfully terminated and possessed evidence of management misconduct that required immediate attention. The appointment was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon at the district headquarters. I spent Tuesday organizing the evidence into a coherent presentation. The photographs, surveillance footage, system logs, and documented pattern of Davidson's activities created an undeniable case of fraud, theft, and employee intimidation. I prepared multiple copies of everything, ensuring that the evidence couldn't be suppressed or destroyed. Wednesday arrived with crisp autumn air and a sense of approaching resolution. I dressed professionally and arrived at the district office 15 minutes early, carrying a briefcase containing Davidson's destruction in organized, documented form. The regional manager, Miss Patterson, was a no-nonsense executive in her 50s who listened to my story with increasing attention and concern. When I began presenting the evidence, her expression shifted from skeptical interest to alarmed focus. The surveillance footage was particularly damning. The original videos clearly showed my innocence during the alleged theft incidents, while also capturing Davidson entering the cash office during unauthorized times and manipulating financial records. The contrast between the original footage and Davidson's edited versions was stark and legally devastating. Miss Patterson called in the district's head of loss prevention and the corporate legal counsel. The meeting that was supposed to last 30 minutes stretched into 3 hours as the full scope of Davidson's crimes became apparent. The customer data theft alone represented potential liability in the millions of dollars. By Thursday morning, Davidson was suspended pending a full investigation. By Friday, he was arrested on charges of embezzlement, identity theft, and wire fraud. The FBI became involved due to the interstate nature of the data trafficking, and Davidson's buyers were identified through the electronic evidence found on his devices. Sarah was immediately reinstated with back pay and a formal apology. The investigation also uncovered 2 other employees who had been wrongfully terminated due to Davidson's manipulation of evidence. All received full compensation and the option to return to work or accept enhanced severance packages. I chose to return to my position, but only temporarily. The coffee shop had offered me a management role, and Mrs. Chen's honest leadership style was far more appealing than navigating the corporate politics that had enabled Davidson's crimes. The civil lawsuit against the grocery chain settled for a substantial sum that provided financial security and validated my determination to seek justice. But the money was secondary to the satisfaction of watching Davidson's carefully constructed lies collapse under the weight of irrefutable evidence. 6 months later, Davidson was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The judge specifically noted the sophisticated nature of his fraud and his abuse of authority in targeting innocent employees. The customer data theft charges alone carried mandatory minimum sentences that ensured he would serve significant time. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom as Davidson learned his fate. He never looked in my direction, but I knew he understood exactly how his downfall had occurred. The man who had destroyed careers and lives through false accusations now faced the consequences of his own crimes. The grocery store chain implemented new security protocols and oversight procedures designed to prevent similar fraud. Sarah was promoted to District Loss Prevention Coordinator, using her experience to identify potential misconduct in other locations. The system that had failed us became stronger through our struggle against it. I kept the coffee shop management position, building a team based on trust and accountability rather than fear and manipulation. The lessons learned from Davidson's tyranny informed every decision I made, ensuring that no employee under my supervision would face the injustice I had endured. Some evenings, I would drive past the grocery store and see the new manager working late in Davidson's former office. The lights would be on, but the atmosphere was different. The fear and tension that had permeated the workplace under Davidson's regime had been replaced by something healthier and more sustainable. The experience changed me in fundamental ways. I learned that justice sometimes requires patience, strategic thinking, and the courage to act when the moment is right. I discovered that truth has a power that no amount of manipulation or authority can ultimately overcome. Davidson had believed that his position protected him from consequences, that he could destroy lives and steal from customers without facing retribution. He had underestimated the determination of those he wronged and the strength that comes from fighting for something greater than personal gain. In the end, his downfall was as systematic and thorough as his crimes had been. The portfolio that had once carried stolen data became evidence in his prosecution. The security system he had manipulated preserved the proof of his guilt. The employees he had threatened became the witnesses to his conviction. I was a cashier accused of theft, but I became something else entirely through the crucible of injustice and the forge of revenge. I became someone who understood that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that the truth, carefully preserved and strategically revealed, possesses a power that no amount of authority can suppress. The grocery store still operates across from the coffee shop, but Davidson's Mercedes never returns to its old parking spot. Instead, the space is occupied by employees who work without fear, customers who trust the system, and managers who understand that integrity is not optional but essential. And I remain watching from my new office window, content in the knowledge that sometimes the innocent prevail, the guilty face consequences, and the system, however flawed, can be forced to serve justice when someone has the courage to demand it.